Well, what are you reading there?
There. Finally finished reading The Godfather.
Oh.
You know, if they tried, they could just make this into a good movie. Welcome to Deep Focus. I'm Nate.
I'm Matt.
And we're meeting today to talk about The Godfather. It's been a little while since we've had the chance to get together.
Yeah, a little bit of time has passed here.
But this classic film is celebrating its 50th anniversary, so I think it's cause for celebration. It brought some nice scotch for us to accompany us along the way.
Yeah, it's a nice bottle.
We'll top it off here.
Oh, I think this will be better than the Paul Masson we had before.
Yeah, well, it's a better movie than Citizen Kane. Controversial opinion right there.
Oh, there you go.
So, better drink for a better movie.
Oh, beautiful.
I figure Michael Corleone was a man who liked his brown liquor, so we'll do the same.
To you, sir.
To you, to the Corleones.
Very nice.
It is. It's a great scotch. So.
Yeah.
Well, yes, so we are talking about The Godfather, the original. I guess we could maybe say right at the top here that we're going to focus our comments tonight just on the first film. In passing, we might inevitably bring up something from the sequels, but really that's not the focus. We're just talking about the first one in honor of its 50th anniversary this month.
Yeah, I think we were debating about, discussing the entire trilogy, and we just settled on, let's just talk about the first one.
Right.
It's the 50th anniversary.
Yep,
let's really just dive deep into this.
Right. And we'll probably visit part 2 maybe in a couple months' time, and focus in on that one as well, and then eventually get our way to part 3. But here tonight, just the first classic, The Godfather. I was thinking about this as part of our continuing conversations of movies we have nothing new to add for, but I did a little bit of this was just a little thing I did. So, my trusty legal pad.
Oh, we got a list.
We have a list. This is something I think doesn't get commented upon about this movie that probably deserves a little bit more attention than it gets. So there's a lot of characters in it, and a lot of people know a lot of the characters in it and quote from the movie regularly. So I sat down just right before we were going to record this here and sat down and thought to myself, without having watched the movie recently at all, how many characters from The Godfather could I name just off the top of my head? So this was just going through real quickly. Who could I remember if I had to think about it? I didn't put them on, just the ones I went in right away. Like, I didn't put Lucy Mancini because I didn't come up with her name right away. Like, I remember the character, but I didn't have the name right away. So when I did that, I came up with a total of 26 characters.
Really?
26 characters.
That's impressive.
Right off the top of my head from this movie.
You've seen this too many times.
I don't think that's possible. But just for compare contrast, then I took a movie that I would have seen, even though it came out many years later, I would have first seen it around the time I first saw The Godfather. And it has a similar kind of epic scope and a lot of characters to it, a movie that I've seen probably an equivalent number of times, and that would be Heat, previously discussed on Deep Focus.
That's right.
And I only could come up with a total of 10 characters that I
Okay.
remembered by name on that.
So Heat is a terrible movie, is what you're trying to say.
Heat is like only a third as good
Yeah.
as The Godfather.
Okay.
That's the lesson that is here. And thanks for watching.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
So, but I think that's one of the things that's worth really reflecting upon this movie is how much it creates a world that you really feel like you have been to and you've been a part of when you were watching it. Even the first time I saw it, I had that experience. And every time I watch it, I still have that same freshness watching. I've never been approached this movie as though it is a stale experience watching it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to confess, this is one of those movies that I was quite resistant to for a long time.
What's the matter? Jesus Christ, I mean, take it easy.
In terms of, maybe it's the contrarian in me, but everyone just talks about, how wonderful it is and it's just the greatest thing. And I was like, just a mob movie and it can't be that great. And
So resistant, like you didn't go to watch it, or
I mean,
like you saw it and you just were kind of lying to yourself and saying it isn't as good as it is.
yeah, more of that, I think. I mean, I would say I really began to appreciate it really during those years in college when I really got into cinema, right? And I had seen parts of it before, and I was like, okay, this is just, it's a mob movie. It's kind of one of those cultural touchstones, but how great is this film, really? It's great. It's really great in every sense of the term, right? And, we've talked about Donnie Brasco, we've talked about this genre in general, and, a lot of people are concerned about, does a movie like this glorify the mob life, or is it making it out to be something that it's not, or is it being prejudicial? Is it being prejudicial toward Italians? Or
Well, Papa never talked business at the table in front of the kids.
Hey, shut up, Carmen.
Hey, don't you ever tell her to shut up. You got that?
Okay.
Don't interfere.
all these things, these controversies that really arose when the film came out, are questions I think that still get asked today. But putting all those things aside, if you just look at this as a work of fiction, as a work of cinema, it deserves every accolade it's gotten, right?
And the winner is Albert S. Ruddy, Godfather.
The film captures narrative cinema like as best as you can, right? I mean, it really does. It just moves very quickly, smoothly. There's just nothing that feels dead in this film at all.
Yeah.
And yet everything also feels like something worth exploring. And some of it's just happy accidents, just getting the right cast in there. Abe Vigoda.
It's his first role, right?
Yeah, it was
in
just
the
an
film,
open
yeah.
casting call. And
Yeah.
then you just think, like, this guy must have been an actor for 30, 40 years. But no, he's just a guy that they brought in. But he's perfect, right? And, just every little detail feels right. Even just the actor that plays Luca Brasi, right? His speech to Vito.
I am honored and grateful that you have invited me to your daughter's wedding. On the day of your daughter's wedding.
Is hilarious. You keep stumbling, can't get the words out. That was just because the actor was nervous playing against Marlon Brando. And so they went back and they added a little detail of him practicing his speech ahead of time to make it all work out. So there was clearly a creative energy and an urgency with Coppola. I mean, he was famously being looked to get fired throughout the entire production. As a matter of fact, he kind of smartly, just before they were going to fire him, he fired all the people that were kind of informants to the studio.
The ones that were trying to fire
Yep.
him, yeah.
And then kind of got just skated by and survived, and what a wonderful thing, because they talked about how they tried to offer this to other directors who I don't think any of them would have been able to bring to it as great as some of those directors were, like Elia Kazan. They couldn't have brought to this the sensibilities Coppola did, because I think Coppola understood Italian Americans.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, just like little details about Clemenza cooking and explaining to Michael how to cook for a bunch of men. Right?
I think Scorsese takes a lot from that too. You think about how he features food in his mob films.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's very Italian, right? I mean, Italians do, especially of that era, would have been much more like, let's talk about the food that we're going to serve, and we're going to have people just around, and then you're going to kind of always be cooking and doing something in the background.
I like to drink wine more than I used to. Anyway, I'm drinking more.
It's good for you, Pop.
And then just some of the actors coming up with smart little improvisations, right? The famous line,
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
it's an improv, right? But all these little accidents kept happening perfectly, and then they add up to this really, truly profound meditation on all things, really, is what it comes down to.
Yeah. Well, and just the idea of the American experience, right? And making your way in a country that has a newfound level of freedom for immigrants, and I think part two, takes that even further, right? Explores that to even greater depth. But this film touches on it too. I mean, again, back to the opening of the film.
I understand. You found paradise in America. You had a good trade, made a good living. Police protected you, and there were courts of law. But you didn't need a friend like me. But now you come to me and you say, Don Corleone, give me justice. But you don't ask with respect. You don't offer friendship.
Just that whole scene that is really kind of a microcosm for this whole picture in some ways.
It might not be a film, they do those like best of all time lists that never tops it. I don't know that I've ever seen that it's topped one of those lists. But it does seem to be the only movie I can think of, maybe part two gets counted into this as well, that is universally agreed to be a great film.
Yeah.
Right? There's other movies, like we talked about Citizen Kane, we've talked about, well, I guess we haven't talked about it, but like we made reference to things like Tokyo Story or something like that, right? And those are films that have passionate supporters that will bump it up on some of those lists. But there's going to be a wide swath of people, whether it's critics or even just general audiences, that will go, I don't care. This thing is going to be popular with scholars. It's going to be regarded with audiences. I mean, everybody who sees this film, I think, walks away from it recognizing they've encountered a classic, right? I mean, it just is a classic in the true sense of what that word is. Yeah. And I think maybe that's the thing maybe to jump off here is it's a classic that almost never happened for a wide variety of reasons. They talk about timing being everything. This coming out when it does in 1972, it's like perfect timing because the old studios were fading fast, but they still were around. And some of those old talents were still around, like a Marlon Brando. Or you had some of these powerhouse producers that could still kind of greenlight a movie and get things made, right? And yet you also had this young talent coming in that was overthrowing everything, like a Francis Ford Coppola or the cast that he brings along that's kind of surrounding Brando in this film. So it's this perfect kind of time for this movie to get made when it does. Robert Evans is, of course, the
famous producer.
Yes, yeah. He's not a technical producer on the movie, but he was in charge of the studio.
Yeah,
and very much hands-on with this production, along with others. And they had all sorts of ideas and suggestions they wanted to pursue. They really saw this as just being a cheap money grab. Mob pictures were not considered high esteem.
Well, I think we have to recognize that this movie was really made despite these studio heads, right? I mean, right. As you said, they really seemed to be wanting. They were fighting every decision that kind of made this film great.
They wanted it to be a contemporary picture, not a period piece.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Robert Redford, not Al Pacino.
Yeah. Well, Ryan O'Neal, right. And they wanted him for Michael. And you read about all these casting choices that they were pushing, and the film wouldn't have been the same thing, right? So thank God for Coppola and standing his ground and really pushing for his vision. I'm not sure how much those studio heads really admitted to their misplaced opinions after the success of this film, but it's interesting to note, how much of a struggle this really was. But I also think it's important to note the era in which it was made, and you touched on that too, right? I mean, this is really a transitional period between studio pictures and a more independent sensibility. So American Zoetrope, Coppola's production company, they were in financial trouble coming off of THX 1138, George Lucas's picture. They were in pretty significant debt to Warner Brothers, and Coppola really took this as a way to make money quickly. But I think he also saw that, okay, this is something, this is a fairly pulpy novel, right, that I could elevate to a new height.
Yeah, so I've read the book. I don't know if you've read it.
I think I attempted to read it many years ago.
It's trash.
It's
just a pulpy little bestseller kind of thing you find in the grocery store.
It's kind of a dime store novel, right? And that's what struck me as I was attempting to read it, and I don't think I finished it because I kind of realized, okay, this is what we're dealing with here. But the fact that this picture, really saw the light of day at all in its current form is pretty miraculous, and we have to recognize that, I think.
Well, it's perfect timing, not just in terms of cinema, but even in terms of America. So in 1972, Watergate hasn't become a national crisis of trust in government, but Vietnam has, and Watergate's just around the corner, right? So people are ready to believe powerful institutions are not to be trusted, that a mobster could be the same as a politician, right?
Yeah.
That line that Michael says to Kay.
But you're not like him, Michael. I thought you weren't going to become a man like your father. That's what you told me.
My father's no different than any other powerful man. Any man who's responsible for other people. Like a senator or a president.
10 years earlier, nobody would have accepted that, right? I think nobody would have believed that in 1962. In 1982, nobody would have cared anymore, right? In 72, it kind of resonates with the audience, right? So it captures America also at the right time for the audience to really land and accept it. Because I think it comes out a couple years in either direction, and it's missing that moment where audiences would eat it up and it become this massive box office as well as critical success, right?
Well, speaking of its timing, you think about the more traditional studio pictures and kind of looks of those films versus more contemporary films. I think it's easy to forget how revolutionary this film was from a visual standpoint. So Gordon Willis' cinematography, famously extremely dark, right? Studio heads looking at the dailies from this picture thought that there was something wrong, and kind of reminds me of our conversation on Citizen Kane too, where it's this very radical visual style. So the picture opens the conversation with Bonacera, and
Amerigo Bonacera basically saying "Good evening, America," right? It's kind of like a "Good night to America."
Yeah. And well, the famous opening line.
I believe in America. America has made my fortune, and I raised my daughter in the American fashion. I gave her freedom, but I taught her never to dishonor her family.
That slow pullback of the camera where he's delivering his monologue, and it almost comes across like a stage performance to a degree. And I that's one thing that strikes me about this film is just how minimalistic it really is in terms of its camera work, right? It's very much a proscenium sort of tableau type look to this film. There's not a lot of camera movement. The editing is actually pretty sparingly done as well. And it's visually just spectacular, right, because of that. But you have the extreme darkness, those crushed blacks in the backgrounds, especially in the Don's office. But contrasted with that, with the kind of overexposed, overblown light of the wedding outside. So there's really these two extremes. And it captures kind of the early color photography of the period, too, in terms of its look. So that level of stylization, I think, we really have to point out here. And I think that probably gets lost on a lot of people because they're so used to films looking very stylized nowadays. And for something to look like this in 1972 was a big deal.
And it's, you hit a point about how it also is extraordinarily restrained. It's not flashy the way just a few years later you'd have someone like Michael Chapman when he was shooting Taxi Driver where the camera's zipping around and it's lots of neon lights. It feels very classical, right? And that's partly because of just not a lot of tricky camera moves, not a lot of things that call attention to itself. It's also, I think, partly the production design. Dean Tavoularis is a famous classic production designer who did exceptional work creating the world of the Corleones, right? Especially in that first scene. The Corleone compound is just telling you everything you need to know about it. With it's just the way they have the blinds, right? And the slits, and you're like, okay, it's this dark, dingy room. This is where the real power is, right? And everything about it just conveys that to you in seconds, and you're just in this world. So it's a perfect combination of visual design, as well as the sound. I think gets forgotten a lot in this film. And they have such brilliant flashes of thought, right? Was Michael's going to kill Sollozzo? How you have the train coming in. Right, in the sense of like the building up of the tension within Michael himself. it doesn't really make any necessarily logical sense because where's the train in relation to this Italian restaurant? But it totally makes sense as far as the actual filmmaking. Right?
And so subliminal, you don't even really notice it.
Yeah, it probably was like 50 times before I picked up on that's what was going on there.
Yeah, because the suspense of that scene is so intense that that sound just kind of amplifies it even further. And yeah, you don't necessarily notice that in the sound design unless it's pointed out to you.
Well, so one of the things that'll be tricky about this discussion is the fact that really anything could be talked about in great detail.
Yeah.
Any one scene could be talked about in great detail. Any one aspect of the filmmaking, the performances, all of it, really could merit its own specific commentary track of sorts, right?
It's hard to know what to focus on.
Right. You're going to kind of be like just trying to grab everything here, I think, in this kind of a review. But maybe just the storytelling we can focus in on, because it is a masterclass of that. It's 3 hours long. Coppola was told by Evans that if he brought it to them with more than 3 hours or 2 hours and 10 minutes, that he was going to bring the editing back to LA. And Coppola wanted to keep it all up in San Francisco, where you could edit it away from the studio.
Yeah.
And he cuts it down to 2 hours and 10 minutes. And Evans says, "There's no movie here. You got to bring it down to LA," right? And so they insert back in to bring it closer to where it is right now. There is edited footage, though. There's scenes that were shot that weren't included that when you see the deleted scenes, they're kind of cool, but you realize, like, yeah, it was smart that they got rid of that for the overall flow of it. It just is expertly made. Like, it's one of those films, when you watch it, you really can't find a single scene that doesn't work. And it flows so smoothly that you don't feel like a 3 hour long runtime on it at all. And it just has this completely absorbing nature that I can see why people could, if you're looking at this in a very immature way, you could see how it does make people feel a kind of a glamorization, because the Corleones are kind of glamorous. I mean, they're wearing tuxes, they're doing.
I mean,
big
they're
things.
wealthy. They're wealthy,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. But you don't get the sense that any of these people are particularly happy.
Hey, son, come on, do me a favor. Watch the kids. Don't let them run wild, all right?
Well, you watch yourself, all right?
Right, but it's an entertaining movie as you're watching it, right? I mean, you're not watching this and going, "Oh, man, the drudgery." I'm thinking about other mob movies like Gomorrah from Italy, right?
Sure.
Which is really just kind of unpleasant experience. I mean, it's a great film, but it's not pleasant to watch.
Yeah.
Whereas this, like, you really get kind of charmed by everything. You find Vito Corleone, is played by Marlon Brando, very alluring.
You spend time with your family?
Sure I do.
Good. Because a man that doesn't spend time with his family can never be a real man.
Right, you find the power and the seductive nature to it, right? You're intrigued by the mechanisms that start once Sollozzo approaches him with the drug deal. And then what is this going to mean for the family and the dynamics with the other mob families, right? You get so sucked into this world and everything that's taking place in it that it is entertaining,
Yeah.
right? But it's not just entertainment, it's real serious art that's saying real serious things about America, capitalism, family, religion. I mean, like, there's no angle of human experience you really can't bring to this and then see this film speak to it in incredible depth.
Yeah, I think the aspect of family is very important to focus on. I think that's where a lot of people relate to this film on a deep level.
Nobody wants bloodshed in my people. If your father dies, you make the deal, Sonny. You know, that's easy for you to say. Tommy's not your father. I was as much a son to him as you are Mike.
Unless you're a mobster or a career criminal, it's hard to make the connections with that content in the film. But I think everyone can understand, the importance of family and protecting your own, and no matter what situation you're in some cases, and this film, I think, smartly emphasizes that.
What this film captures, which is a very universal thing, is of course that love of family that you describe, but also like the disillusionment too, right? Michael's a perfect character for that.
His arc is amazing in this film.
I mean, it's a sad arc because it's an arc of a fall.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he starts out coming back as a war hero.
You know, Mike, we was all proud of you being a hero, your father too.
It's right after World War II, so again, that's perfect time. The fact that they made it a period piece didn't make it contemporary is awesome because it's a time when America was at its height, right? Had just won the war, had just kind of begun what was going to be the American century in full force, right? And Michael comes back as the war hero, but is also disaffected from his family, right? And he's very clear to his Protestant girlfriend, because that's the thing. Kay's kind of almost like he's marrying America, because it's like, she's like the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, right? And so he is going this route, and she's even got her hair done up like Pat Nixon at that time.
That's right.
Right. And so all these different things are like him wanting to go this different direction, but he gets brought in out of a sense of a loyalty to family. But it's weird because it's also not personal, but strictly business.
Where does it say that you can't kill a cop?
Come on, Mikey.
Tom, wait a minute. I'm talking about a cop that's mixed up in drugs. I'm talking about a dishonest cop, a crooked cop who got mixed up in the rackets and got what was coming to him.
It's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business.
Right. And so the way the family ties its interests in business as basically a test of loyalty is an incredibly powerful meditation on the corrupting nature of relationships, right? How you can corrupt good things by pursuit of power, violence, money, sex, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and Pacino's performance, just the physicality of his performance, I think is remarkable. You look at those early scenes at the wedding versus him at the end of this film. I mean, it's a completely different person, right? But at the same time, you know why that transformation took place. I mean, if there's one criticism I would level at this film, it's that kind of period after his time in Sicily and then him reappearing to Kay. There's a gap there, right? I mean, it's at least a year.
He said,
yeah, he says like more than a year. And you know that, okay, something profound has changed in him during that period. And sometimes I wish the film explored that a little bit more, but 3 hours already. I mean, you have to kind of cut to the chase to a degree, but it does feel like a bit of a cheat sometimes to kind of jump ahead like that. I guess maybe it sells that transformation in a way too.
It is abrupt.
It's a small criticism.
It's abrupt, but I think it still works because we get the sense that, okay, Michael, he kills Solozzo and McCluskey, right?
Yeah.
That scene where he sets up what he's going to do
and
is
well,
incredible.
Let me just interrupt you there. Why do you think he just decides to do that? Like, why do you think he's okay with doing that? That's one thing I've always struggled with too, because he comes home, he seems to be very content to be outside the family. Then all of a sudden, in that moment, the camera's pushing in on him, right? And he makes the declaration.
But if Clemenza can figure a way to have a weapon planted there for me, then I'll kill them both.
Is it he's used to killing from the war? Is it he's decided that, okay, this is my opportunity to do something for the family? I've always struggled with that decision point and why he made it.
I think that it's a couple of different things. I think there is part of the idea that, well, he was in the war and he was willing to kill there and was around death a lot. But I also think there's an element to which he is his family, even though he's protesting against it. He might have the intellectual awareness of, I don't want to be this. Yeah. I see the problems with my dad being a mob boss, right? He tells the story about getting Johnny Fontaine out of the contract.
My father made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
What was that?
Luca Brazzi held a gun to his head, and my father assured him that either his brains or his signature would be on the contract. That's my family, Kay. It's not me.
I never really thought that was an honest statement from him. I mean, I think when you're at the time you're watching it the first time, you see it that way, but you go back, you watch it again, you kind of see he's that. I think he always has been that, right? I don't think he's ever been as innocent as he may have wanted to be.
Yeah, maybe.
And I think that's why he can make that transition. But one of the more important scenes in the film that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it's just a very powerful moment, and it's a really, truly incredible acting by both Brando and Pacino, is in the hospital, right? So Solozzo has managed to get the police, McCluskey, to get all the different police bodyguards out of there, and so he's vulnerable, and Michael happens upon him.
I'm with you now. I'm with you.
And you can see in there is a real, true, profound, protective nature to him, and there is a real bond that they
I'm
have.
with you now. Yeah.
It's really, really powerful. I mean, it's like so touching on one level. You understand there is a deep love that he has for his family, and therefore I don't think he can ever really be that statement. It's not my family, or it's my family. It's not me. I don't think that can ever be an honest statement from Michael. I think it is him, and so that's why he can make that move to kill McCluskey and Sollozzo.
So we probably have to expand more on performances. I mean, we talked about Al Pacino and just how incredible he is in this film, and we have to mention too, of course, that he was not wanted for this picture, right? I think we touched on that earlier, but it's hard to imagine anyone but him in this role. And of course, Marlon Brando
also was not wanted.
Not wanted. This is a point in his career where his star had kind of faded, right?
This was his comeback. This wound up being his comeback.
Yeah, and he went on to do like Superman and Apocalypse Now after this, so he kind of had a resurgence after this picture. And he famously won and rejected the Best Actor Oscar.
That he very regretfully cannot accept this very generous award. And the reasons for this being are the treatment of American Indians today by the film industry.
And Pacino, by the way, little known fact, rejected his nomination because he thought he should be in the leading role, not the supporting role, which is true.
Yeah.
He is a lead with Brando in this film.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I do want to focus on some of the supporting characters too. I mean, Robert Duvall is fantastic in this picture, and he's always great. I mean, he's one of my favorite actors, but
beautifully understated performance, as he usually does.
Yeah, and he's a very interesting character too, right? Because he's an adopted son into this family, and there's a dimension to his character that's very unique, and his loyalty runs as deep as any blood member of the family. But he delivers some of the comedy in the film too. The moment when
McFriend.
Well, beyond that, the time when he's laughing when Brando is criticizing Fontaine for his display of weakness, right, is a really beautiful little moment. But when he gets angry at Sonny, those exchanges when he loses his temper, that's startling too.
Sonny, what? Things are starting to loosen up a little bit. If you go after Tattaglia, all hell's gonna break loose. Let the smoke clear. Pop can negotiate.
No, Pop can't do nothing till he's better. I'm gonna decide what's gonna go.
All right, but your war's costing us a lot of money. Nothing's coming in. We can't do business.
Well, neither can they. Don't
They
worry
don't
about
have
it.
our
Please
overhead.
don't worry about
We
it.
can't afford a stalemate.
Well, then there ain't no more stalemate. I'm gonna end it by killing that old bastard. I'm gonna
Yeah, you're getting
kill
a
him.
great reputation. I hope you're enjoying
Well,
it.
you just do what I tell you to do. God damn it, if I had a wartime consigliere of Sicilian, I wouldn't be in a shape.
As his performances, Tom Hagen is obviously the consigliere. He's the real brains of those that are in the business, right?
He has a special legal practice.
Right,
One client.
One client. And he obviously is very intelligent, and he's really trying to think this through practically.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, even the whole proposition from Sollozzo about the drugs, his point is thinking long term.
He's kind of like the political advisor to a president,
right?
Basically.
Now we have the unions, we have the gambling, and they're the best things to have. But narcotics is a thing of the future. If we don't get a piece of that action, we risk everything we have. I mean, not now, but 10 years from now.
Corleone has a sense of what I don't want to go down. But Hagen's saying, listen, business-wise, we should do this. We should get into drugs. And even when it comes to the war, he's like, we should look for the deal. And Sonny is the hothead, right? And so, Duvall, even when it comes to that time when he has to tell Vito about the fact that Sonny died, I mean, what a wonderful performance he has in that.
I was about to come up and wake you just now and tell you.
But you needed a drink first. Now you've had your drink.
They shot Sonny on the causeway. He's dead.
The softness with which she delivers that line, he's dead.
Yeah.
Kind of just, you get the sense of also the fact that while he is kind of this calculating man, he is part of the family. He's announcing the death of his brother to his father, right? Not just a businessman making a unfortunate news report or something like that, right? And so I think, yeah, there's just so many layers to his performance and everybody else's too. I mean, I think a couple of people that don't get as much attention just because they're not family properly, right? Obviously, we mentioned Abe Vigoda as Tessio, really just wonderful and also humorous. He brings some levity to his part. And then, of course, it's Richard Castellano, who plays Clemenza.
Yes.
Wonderful performance. I mean, really, really great.
Very genuine, yeah.
Yes. And again, some comedy.
Hey, Mikey, why don't you tell that nice girl you love her? I love you with all of my heart. If I don't see you again soon, I'm gonna die.
And I just think that these characters round out the other principal parts, right? And if we didn't have them, your performances by Pacino or James Caan or whoever are going to fall a little flat because these are the flavorings that really make the core drama more real.
Yeah, it adds that authenticity, you know, and John Cazale, is it Cazale? Cazale. John Cazale playing Fredo, of course.
Have you ever noticed, by the way, this is one of the little, it took me forever to find this, but there's an obvious double for him in one of the shots. Have you noticed it? It's when,
I don't know if I ever have.
When Michael is going to Vegas and they get out of the car, they must have not had John Cazale around. And so Pacino gets out, but the guy that's clearly with him is some guy wearing a bad wig that's meant to be dressed as Fredo. And there's also a couple of the kippies inside the lobby of the hotel.
There's a few flubs in this film.
Right.
The missed punch with Carlo is a big one, and a couple weird editing issues too. When they meet with the five families, there's kind of this long tracking shot. Going over all the different mob bosses. The beginning of that shot, there's this really weird abrupt cut that always stands out to me. But yeah, it's just, again, nitpicks.
Yeah. Well, that's really all you can do is, like,
Yeah.
if you get very pedantic in some of your criticism here, yeah, it's not a perfect movie in the sense that there's no continuity error or there's not a single, mistake in terms of what they could capture. They maybe went with the best take they had, right? But it's a perfect film as far as theme. It's a perfect film as far as casting. Maybe the only person that you could say you could maybe replaced and had just as good or better performance is Diane Keaton. Like maybe a Jane Fonda or somebody could have given just as good of a
pretty
performance.
minimal role to begin with.
But
yeah.
Otherwise, I mean, like, there's just nobody in this movie. I mean, Talia Shire, as Connie, she's fantastic and plays the spoiled mob boss's daughter perfectly, whether it's when she runs out to Johnny Fontaine and is totally just making a scene, or whether it's the way she has the temper tantrum in that very disturbing scene that leads to her getting beaten, which is all, of course, a ruse to kill Sonny. I mean,
which was actually added at the urging of the studio to
they needed
put
a
more
violence director, and so that was done by Coppola to avoid having a violence director attached to the project. He shot that scene and sent it to them, and I think the studio's like, never mind. We need to talk about Brando's performance.
Yeah, okay.
I think, obviously he was very much quickly parodied. This is one of the parts that he's most known for. And it's been so parodied in so many different areas, whether it's comics or whether it's other movies. They had the Don's Analyst on Saturday Night Live, right? And so
he even parodied himself, right?
Yeah, The Freshman.
Yeah.
Which is actually a pretty good movie. If anybody wants to see The Freshman, I'd recommend it. But I think it's actually an incredibly good performance.
Yeah.
It's now so much a part of the cultural memory that I think sometimes it's hard to approach this performance fresh.
Well, it's so good that I think people forget that how much of a performance this really is. I mean, you look at him in this picture versus him in Apocalypse Now, which was made, 7 years later.
Right. Or just a year later, Last Tango in Paris, right?
The physicality, the transformation he goes through to become Vito Corleone is startling, and I think a lot of people just assume that's the way Marlon Brando looked at that time. That's not the case.
Right. And well, I just think he really does create a character. I mean, some of the Saul gestures, especially when it's Mona Sara's speaking to him, and then just the way he hears and then responds to him, right? Power. He conveys power.
I should have had an orange on the counter here.
Yeah, I did wear orange partly in
there you go.
reference
All
to
right,
that. And also Cavallarizi's very loud, very obnoxious suit. Even if he hadn't beaten Connie, he should have been beaten for wearing that suit.
It was a rough choice, yeah.
Although I think it's actually a sign of brilliant costume design. Because the costume design in this is really cool. I mean, they do a couple things. Like, I know I was just talking about Marlon Brando's performance, but this is the way the movie is. Like, you can just go down any rabbit hole. But it's obviously a period piece, but the costumes still do tell you about the characters.
Yeah.
You think about Michael doesn't wear a hat, and then he starts wearing a hat towards the end. Like, just a small little decision about costume. Like, as he enters into the family, becomes more like the other men around him, he starts wearing a hat like they do. You have Carlo wearing that obnoxious suit, but it's also because he's kind of an obnoxious character, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that he's always looking low class and like he's just trying to be like he's more than he is, right? So there's cool little things like that they do throughout this film that really do convey the character through all these different film techniques, right?
Yeah, I refrained from wearing the white tank top and the suspenders like Sonny. I didn't want to completely scare away everyone.
So, yeah. Well, let's maybe talk about James Caan in this as well. No, let's go back and finish what I was saying about Marlon Brando.
Yeah. I put you off on a tangent there, sorry.
Yeah, well, that's what this movie can do to you. But Brando, in this performance, really does convey a father.
I have a sentimental weakness for my children, and I spoil them, as you can see. They talk when they should listen.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's the scenes he has with Michael, particularly towards the end, and then, of course, even the heartbreaking death scene when he's with his grandson, he's playing with Anthony. But even just the way that scene where he mourns for Sonny.
Look how they massacred my boy.
It's one of my favorite moments of acting in any movie I've ever seen. I mean, I don't know I've ever seen grief portrayed so well. And it's part of the brilliance of this film in that you have a man who is a monster. I mean, he's killed people. He is involved in organized crime that we don't see the really effect of the crimes that they're committing, right? We don't really know how the Corleones are making other people's lives miserable by encouraging gambling or prostitution, whatever it might be. But this terrible man, this truly evil man, all of a sudden is given a humanity, and you're forced to confront that. And then Michael similarly is in that situation, right? And you're watching Michael lose his humanity as he's trying to save his father and his family's own humanity in a sense. So it's this really thematically complex and powerful way of understanding human beings. And the performances, I think, are a big part of it. And Brando's in particular, I think, is a big part of why we relate to this movie the way we do.
Well, just the idea of virtue and vice being so intertwined, right? And how the line between the two can be quite thin sometimes. And I think that's what you're getting at there in terms of, you could say that it's a virtue that Michael is protecting his family, right? By taking over as Don. But to do that, he has to partake in incredible evil. And, where does one end and the other begin? And yeah, this film is asking those hard questions. And to say that it's glorifying mob life or excusing it in some way or, making it seem passable because it's for the family, I think is disingenuous. I mean, I think this film is very honest about the destructive nature of this life, especially as we get to the other films, parts 2 and 3.
Yeah, I mean, this film certainly did have, I think, a group of people, particularly right away, that responded to it almost like, I want to be Michael, I want to be Sonny, I want to be whatever.
Missing the point.
Yeah, and I think in some ways that Coppola was responding to that in the subsequent films.
Yeah.
And clarifying some of the things that were mistaken here. But if you're watching this film and you're watching it intelligently, it's about a man's fall. I mean, that's really what it's about. It's about a man falling into sin, a man falling into hell. And you see, like, Sonny, big, powerful figure. James Caan gives a fantastic performance. You really do get the manic nature of him and the unpredictability of him. But how does his life turn out? Not so great.
Yeah, not so great.
Yeah. And so I think the film really does have a very moral voice, and cynical, but a cynicism that is merited. I mean, it's not nihilistic. It's cynical, but it's not nihilistic.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the music in this film.
Nino Rota.
Nino Rota's score, very, very memorable.
The theme from Fortunella, which was an earlier film in Italy, which actually he was nominated for an Oscar, and then it got revoked.
Got retracted,
they claimed it was too much of the score was from previous elements. I have no idea what the rules are for the Oscars, but it's a brilliant score, however he came up with it.
Yeah, it's a pretty minimalistic score. I mean, the theme, of course, is very memorable, and has been parodied many times as well. But yeah, this film wouldn't be what it is without that music.
Credes in Spiritum Sanctum, Sanctam Ecclesiam Catholicam, Sanctorum Communionem Remissionem Peccatorum.
It's haunting. It's a haunting score, which I think again helps to discredit the claims of this being a glamorization.
Yeah,
it really conveys a certain kind of melancholy, and it also conveys suspense. It works to hit the emotions, particularly the scenes. We haven't talked much about Michael going to Sicily when he has to go into hiding after kills Sollozzo, and the way the music works in that particular portion of walking along with Michael through that exile, we'll call it, I think really hits home the isolation, the loneliness of his character. Because he does, I think, even that he is not completely transformed into what he will become at the end of the film. He has a certain regret, and just the learning about the vendettas and everyone's dead in his hometown, his family's home county, because of vendetta, right? I think the score really helps draw all these beautiful elements together.
There's a pastoral quality to it at times too, right? Just kind of showcasing the beautiful scenery there in Sicily. But it never quite spills over into melodrama or really an overtly romanticized sound.
Yeah, it's restrained. And it's used sparingly. There's a lot of scenes that don't have it that you could see easily having it, although it does come in very strongly. I'm thinking about after Michael kills Sollozzo and the way the music kind of just explodes, right? But it's earned in that explosion because something has exploded. Like the whole world's like blown up for the Corleones, and then you go into the montage and the mob war really is raging, right? So yeah, it's a brilliant score, and I think rightly has been hailed as one of the great cinematic scores.
It's a beautifully crafted film. It's something that you turn it on, it's hard to turn it off. It's one of those films. Along with Michael Bay's Armageddon, it's just something, and when it's on, it pulls you in, and it really doesn't get old.
It's the beautiful mixture of high art and low art, in a sense, and I mean that in the best sense of both words. Right?
Yeah, it's one of those rare films that I think has wide public appeal, but really does exemplify the power of cinema and narrative film.
Well, let's maybe think of it in relation to something like what's real popular right now. Like you think about all the comic book movies that, and I'm not going to go into the whole or not cinema thing, but there's an effort. There's almost like a cottage industry of think pieces being written to pretend like those movies are saying more than they really are.
Yeah.
Or there's even like the most recent, The Batman. Like this idea of let's really try to give it this lofty height. There's almost an air of pretense around that now. This film isn't that. I mean, it just is brilliant. But it's brilliant entertainment, right? So someone can simply just enjoy it and experience the filmmaking. But then if you have a serious conversation, a serious essay, whatever, it's not someone who's trying to read into something that's not there. It's all there.
Yeah, I kind of compare this to Shakespeare, in many ways.
It's perfect comparison.
Yeah, Shakespeare is not someone that you look at the material on its own. It stands on its own. The depth is there without airs of pretension, and this film falls into that camp. It reminds me of like the first few seasons of The Wire. It's just like, okay, this is just quality storytelling. You can tell the voices behind it are passionate about the story that they're telling, and yeah, it's really about the experience of the film. It's the experience of the characters, the experience of the story, and not building up their own egos, right?
Well, I guess, like you've talked about the cinematography, production design, performances, I mean, the music, all of it together has made for tons of cultural touchstones, right? The Simpsons, Family Guy, other movies.
Endless parodies. Yeah.
There's parodies, there's homages. I mean, everything kind of, really, we've had 50 years of this
Seinfeld did the ending of the film, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 50 years of this movie influencing this. I mean, even something like Kramer versus Kramer, which came out at the end of the 70s, that ending on the elevator strikes me as being heavily influenced by the ending of The Godfather, right? You wouldn't think a genteel divorce drama would be influenced by a mob movie, but it was. I really can't see how it wasn't. So yeah, this film's really shaped culture. I mean, President Obama and Saddam Hussein have both cited it as their favorite movie of all time. Like,
really?
Yeah. So
I did not know that.
Yeah. So
yikes.
That's something. That is something this movie can say.
Well, we can all find common ground if you look deep enough, I guess.
Yes. This is the way forward. This is how America unites. The world unites. Is we all admit the greatness of The Godfather.
That's not a terrible plan.